And if you have experience working with reusable systems, Stephanie, great to see you're here. I know you've been working with restaurants throughout DC, so I look forward to your comments and questions throughout. And I think we're now going to turn it over to your moderator, Tiandra.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks everybody for participating in the chat. We're ready to get started now. Just to let everyone know, we will be recording this event. I wanted to start off by saying happy plastic-free July to everyone. As Leah mentioned, my name is Tiandra Willingham. I'm a volunteer with the DC chapter of the Sierra Club, and we're excited to welcome you to the Turning Takeout Green webinar. Today's event has been organized by the Zero Waste Committee in partnership with Our Last Straw. We're delighted that Dan Simons of Farmers Restaurant Group, the founder of Our Last Straw, is joining us today, along with our other two guest speakers, John and Rachel. We'll be introducing them later on. And just to refocus, so I know you've all heard or seen environmental studies and articles about waste from single-use items, largely dominating global litter. And the most widespread litter items are single-use bags, bottles, food containers, and wrappers. We easily see this locally as we observe overflowing trash in our neighborhoods in and around our local restaurants. So this afternoon, for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about how to move beyond single-use food containers through reusables. And during the pandemic, while many of us really wanted to support our local restaurants, many green customers were and still are uncomfortable that takeout orders come at the expense of creating more waste from disposable single-use plastic containers. The good news is that there is an alternative based on circular economy strategies. In short, we can turn takeout green through reusable takeout containers. Reusable takeout containers can be provided by a closed loop service provider, much like linen services at a restaurant. This webinar will explore how reusable takeout container services work. We'll learn the views of one of DC's leading sustainable restaurant owners and hear how the new Zero Waste Omnibus Amendment Act could help. We'll also ask key stakeholders to share their thoughts and reactions, and then we'll turn the floor over to you for Q&A. We want to give restaurants and other food service entities like university cafeterias plenty of time to have their questions and concerns answered. We'd also like to answer questions that our government attendees may have. We hope that you'll agree that now's the time to change course. We strongly believe that reusables are definitely the way to go. So we want to keep things moving along in our chat. So if you don't mind responding to this question, have you used reusable containers before? Please share your experience related to reusable containers in the chat. Let's also discuss why the DC chapter of the Sierra Club is organizing this event. We're interested in turning takeout green in DC and raising awareness among both restaurant and government decision makers on how these services work and can benefit restaurants. We want to provide an opportunity for both restaurants and government leaders to get their questions answered. Let's face it, the alternative to disposable takeout trash will never happen if restaurants aren't on board. So we're 100% glad to have so much participation from the local restaurants in this area. As a disclaimer, we want to note that the Sierra Club does not play a role in selling or providing these services. We'd also love to hear what else needs to be done to make reusable takeout container services a reality in DC. Do you think there's a need for additional dialogue to accelerate reuse and other circular economy strategies that could help DC meet its zero waste goals, including its 2032 waste diversion goals? If so, what kind of dialogue and with whom? Please put your questions in the chat and your comments as the speakers are presenting and key stakeholders respond. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. We also want you to engage in the chat, ask questions, share your experiences, and network. We'll be posting the speakers' emails in the chat also, so you can contact them after the event. Right before we introduce our speakers for this afternoon, we want to first conduct a short poll to learn a little bit more about you, our participants. Alexis, could you kindly launch the poll for us? We're going to give you 60 seconds to respond to our 3 questions. And while you are answering those questions, I hope you don't mind that I talk some more. In the meanwhile, if any of you guys are live tweeting about this event, we encourage you to use hashtag taming takeout trash. Once again, if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag taming takeout trash. And we have about 20 more seconds left on that poll. So if you're just joining us today, if you could just jump right on in and answer a quick poll. And the poll has been closed. Thank you, Alexis, for your help. Alexis is one of our volunteers at the Sierra Club. Let me share those responses with you. So question number 1, my concerns about reusable takeout container services are, so it looks like the majority or 68% of the respondents say returning containers, which I agree. And then there was a nice group that said sanitation and container composition and or adequate supply as well. Number 2, how much can businesses save each year by switching to reusables? So question number 2 is actually a trick question. It's one of those all of the aboves, and I'm gonna break it down for you. So according to the Reusable Food Serviceware Guide, switching to reusables saves about $2,000 for a food truck, which was also 2,600 pounds of waste, as noted in the answer. 3,800 for a 23-seat cafe, and 5,000 for a fast casual 48-seat restaurant. And you can also see the waste savings noted. So there's more good news on cost savings with reusables in a Reuse Wins report from Upstream Solutions. And Angela is going to add these 2 reports to the chat, so you can definitely look at those on your own time. We strongly encourage that. Question number 3, I would be interested in participating in a reusable takeout container program as the number 1 answer was customer. So that's great. That's actually great to hear. So now that our polls have been completed, we are ready to dive in and meet our speakers for today. All right, we have 3 outstanding speakers joining us today. We have John Hansen, representing a reusable takeout container service company, currently doing business in Tacoma Park. We have Dan Simons, a leading local sustainable restaurant owner. And we have Rachel Clark, a representative from the DC Council. So thank you, John, Dan, and Rachel for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to ask each of our speakers questions to get us going, and I'll give them 3 minutes to respond before we check in with a few stakeholders from industry and government to see what their reaction or response is. So John, we're going to start with you. I have a 3-part question for you. How do reusable takeout container services work, including cost? How do they benefit restaurants? And are reusables the same as compostables?
John, you're still muted. Okay, great. So can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. And excellent. So here we go. My name is John, and I am, as you mentioned, the founder of Paradigm to Go, a reusable takeout container program servicing the DC metro area. Our mission is to reduce single-use disposable products in the food service sector and to accelerate the circular economy. Now, to answer your last question first, about compostables and reusables. Reusable products are not the same as compostable products, and vice versa. Compostable products are still single-use disposable products, one use, and you throw them out. Reusable takeout container services, however, are designed so that a single reusable product can be used over and over and over and over again until they reach the end of their useful life in their current form, which can be hundreds of uses, and then are recycled and or remanufactured into new products, hence avoiding the waste stream altogether. Now, in terms of the basic model of a reusable container program, let me get my slides to advance. There we go. There's typically a reuse service provider like Paradigm to Go that provides QR coded or some other type of coded reusable containers to participating food service vendors as a product as a service or product of service. Consumer members of the program order from those participating restaurants. The restaurant places their order in those reusable containers. When the member receives their food, they scan the code on the containers to let the service provider know that they have them. Or there are other systems as well, but that's all typically basically in that ballpark. The customer then enjoys their meal wherever they decide to dine, and then simply returns the container to a local kiosk or collection bin wherever the service provider has it. Then the service provider will collect and sanitize those containers and then restock the participating restaurants. There are variations to the basic business model depending if the organization is a private business or if it's a nonprofit or if it's a public-private partnership, but for the most part, that's the basic structure. Now, in terms of Paradigm to Go, we follow this basic structure and we provide reusable containers that we hope make doing reuse both zero waste, fun, easy, and convenient. It's as simple as order, eat, return, and repeat. And we're working on building out a network of restaurants and consumers across the cultural hubs and city centers of Washington, D.C. metro area that are committed to great taste, zero waste, and a sustainable future. Now, on the environmental side, the benefits are pretty straightforward. As you can see from this is actually both environmental and also cost if you are looking at it from the perspective of a service provider, a restaurant, et cetera. Every time you use one reusable takeout container, you avoid the use of a single-use disposable container and all of its past and future negative environmental impacts. And they can also be used hundreds of times, as you can see here, before they are intentionally recycled and or remanufactured. Now, in terms of the business benefits for food service and providers, et cetera, on the cost savings and impact avoidance side, we've got supply cost savings. Every time one of your customers uses a reusable container, you're saving the cost of that container. The more restaurants participate in and promote the program to its customers, the more money they will save. On the environmental impact side, obviously, you've got reduced pollution, CO2 and methane emissions, less waste in the environment, watershed and oceans, et cetera. On the revenue generating side, which is the lower section of the bullet points there, we did a micropilot last fall, and during that micropilot, we did intake and exit surveys. From those surveys, we found that 10% of the participants order food from the participating restaurant for the first time. That's a new customer. 65% ordered more frequently because of the reusable container program. 95% said that they would order from new restaurants if they had a reusable container program. 80% of the participants typically ordered for 2 to 3 people, again, giving a sense of volume. And 85% said that they told their friends, family, and colleagues about the program. And that all translates to new customers and increased revenue. On the marketing and promotions and branding, reuse service provider like ours and all the others typically are invested in the active participation of both the restaurant and the customer member, so that they will typically dedicate a lot of time and focus and resources to actively promoting the restaurants and encouraging their members to order, and tell their friends to join. And every order is multiple containers that can be saved from the environment. Now, ultimately, what the reusable container food service programs can help build is to build and accelerate a clean, equitable, and just circular economy. And due to time, I'm going to kind of pause it there and just say thank you for your time, Sierra Club DC. This is a terrific event. And if anybody is interested in partnering or becoming a member, please contact us via our website at paradigm2go.com or via email at hello@paradigm2go.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I absolutely can't wait for your services to move around. I'm in DuPont Circle. I can't wait to use them. I can't wait for you to grow and expand throughout the DC area for sure. If you guys have questions for John, go ahead and start posting those in the chat now, because I can think of a dozen questions for myself. But right now we're going to move to Dan, and we're going to ask Dan a two-part question. So Dan, can you express to us what are the challenges and opportunities for restaurants in adopting reusable takeout containers? And the second part of that question is, what would it take for Farmers Restaurant Group to adopt reusable takeout containers?
Thanks so much, Tiandra, and thanks for giving me the chance to be here. So I'll begin with the end in mind here. As far as what would it take for us, I'll just start with from a sentiment standpoint, from a desire standpoint, from an intent standpoint, from a want standpoint. My team is already there. We've been working on this issue for a long time. And I would say, as a business owner and a restaurateur, the pandemic has just even more so highlighted for me how frustrated, worried, guilty, concerned I feel that I am participating and am part of the problem. I think it's important that as business owners, business people, leaders in any capacity, that we start there, right? And so I'm part of the problem. Yeah, I'm trying to do some good things, and that's why my team started Our Last Straw, but I won't be satisfied that we started Our Last Straw really because we saw straws as something bite-sized that we could tackle. I won't be satisfied until it's really our last blank. Fill in the blank with plastic fork, plastic to-go container, frankly, any petroleum-based single-use plastics. I will be thrilled when we have our big Our Last umbrella. So that's really the end in mind. That's where we're trying to get to. The challenges and opportunities, and listening to John is great. And I'm so thankful that innovators and folks are willing to put their passion to this like John is. So we have a challenge inside the restaurant of running two programs at the same time. And so a slow adoption to a reusable program is very difficult. I don't want to say impossible. Not so many things are impossible, but it feels unfeasible at this point because I would have to stock all of my current to-go containers, and I would have to stock a full inventory of the reusable container. Simply having that space would be a physical challenge in restaurants like mine. And then the operational training of knowing that every ticket that prints in the kitchen, it could go on a plate, it's for here, it could be to go, it could be to go in recyclable, it could be to go in reusable. So there's some complexities and some challenges there. The other challenges I think are obvious, and folks have highlighted those, cleaning them, the circular aspect. I actually think that's all doable. The opportunities are obvious, right? The planet, the stakeholders, my kids, so that they can look at me and my wife and be proud of our business and not feel like we're profiting off of destroying the earth. And I think there's opportunities in guest loyalty and those things. To get us there, I currently think, I say currently because the challenge is these things unfold and brainstorms like this help things evolve. Currently, I think public-private partnership is a good way to go. Maybe some philanthropy injection so that we can make the economics really work in the interim. I agree with John, you can get to a point where it's, net neutral cost impact or a savings, but getting there takes money and resources and effort. And then the last thing I'll say, I think it takes regulation. We need signs in the public that say no littering. People need rules. People need to be told what to do. Speed limits are a really good idea. Seatbelts are a good idea. So I am a big fan of good, sensible, operationally rooted regulation to help follow the rules, but really to stimulate investment up the vertical with venture capitalists, manufacturers, logistics people, so that people can see there's a business opportunity wrapped around this solution.
Thank you, Dan. You made a lot of really great points, a lot of things that we should really drill down and unpack. You did mention early on, the guilt, and we all feel that guilt, whether we're a business owner or just a person. And, that's why we're here. We're just trying to come together to determine ways that we can be better. So this is definitely a great step in the right direction. And thank you a lot for your participation on this call today. You mentioned regulation, so that's actually a really good segue to our next speaker, Rachel Clark. We have a three-part question for her. She is part of the committee that worked on the DC Zero Waste Omnibus Amendment Act of 2020, which is a really long name. So we'd like for you to respond to, what does the Zero Waste Omnibus Amendment Act of 2020 mean for reusable takeout container services here in DC? Is there any support foreseen for restaurants or service providers? And what can you tell us about budget appropriations for fiscal year 2022?
Hi, so yeah, I'm Rachel Clark. As Chandra said, I'm a legislative counsel for Councilmember Mary Che and the Committee on Transportation and the Environment, which she chairs. And in this role, I help develop and oversee district environmental policy, which includes waste diversion initiatives. And just as background for those of you who don't know, although I'm sure most of you do, the district has an ambitious zero waste goal of diverting 80% of its waste from incineration and landfill by 2032. But right now we have a citywide diversion rate of 16%. So we are not making the progress that we hope. And to try to help with that, the council has been working on legislative solutions and passed the Zero Waste Omnibus Amendment Act of 2020 in December. And this is a big bill that I will not talk about all of it, but it includes improved source separation, organic waste diversion, and reuse and waste reduction initiatives. And so of special interest today is one provision in the bill that aims to reduce the amount of waste associated with single-use food serviceware. This provision would help restaurants move away, or any food service entity, I should say, move away from disposables, in part by offering rebates in the use where. And these is to help restaurants cover the cost of dishwashing capacity or purchasing dishes, or it could be used to procure reusable takeout services like we've been talking about today. And the grants or rebates could go to the reusable takeout providers themselves to help support development of these programs in the district. And so to your other questions, the bill was passed in December 2020, but in DC, a bill doesn't go into effect until it's funded, which happens during the annual budget process. And we're in the middle of that now. It's very delayed for a number of reasons. And I'm really pleased to say that the Committee on Transportation and the Environment included funding for the provision I just described in its budget, which would be $200,000 in annual funding for grants or rebates, and $65,000 annually for administration and outreach. And the program will be administered by DOEE, the Department of Energy and Environment, which will also be in charge of designing the program beyond the general parameters that are set out in the bill. And while we're really excited that we were able to fund this in committee, our proposed budget still requires 2 council votes, which are scheduled for July 20th and August 3rd. And we don't expect there to be any changes, but I can't say that this is official until the votes are done. And so assuming they get voted through, as we hope, the provision and its funding will go into effect beginning the first day of fiscal year 2022, which is actually this October 1st. And then at that point, it will be in DOEE's hands. So I'm excited to see how this program develops and happy to answer questions when we get to that part of the program today.
Thank you, Rachel. Rachel is full of a lot of good news for us today. We're definitely glad that you were able to come and be a part of this webinar today. So we do have a lot of questions coming in. And if you haven't posted your question, feel free to go ahead and get into the chat to post your question. And we'll begin to take some of them after we hear from a few stakeholders that were able to join us today. I'd like to note that we are very happy that Julie Sprouser, the Managing Director of the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington, is with us today. And she's also happy to answer any questions directed to the Restaurant Association. To get our conversation rolling, we have a two-part question for Julie.
Great.
Knowing DC restaurants, what would you anticipate being their major concerns and challenges in adopting a reusable takeout container system? And how could the Restaurant Association support rollout of reusable takeaway containers in DC?
Sure. Well, first, Tiandra and everybody, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today on this important topic. I think, from an overall perspective, I've been with the Restaurant Association since 2012. The Mayor's Sustainable DC legislation came out just after that, I think in 2013. And we spent a lot of time working with our members to help them understand, what a polystyrene ban looks like, what are some of the measures of this legislation do, and what was their feedback in terms of how it would affect them, how we could support them, knowing that this was all coming down the pike. And, overwhelmingly, everybody in our industry, from small restaurants to food trucks to large restaurants, really shared, Dan Simon's sentiment from Founding Farmers of, our hearts are in this. We want to do the right thing. We want to be green friendly. We want to be compostable. We want to compost. We want to take all of these things on to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think from a heartfelt perspective, that's there across our industry. And many of our operators have taken great strides to introduce measures to be part of being the solution, right? I think it gets into a lot of things Dan mentioned. It's the logistics of how do we afford it? Who are the suppliers who can help us afford it? What are our options? And, on the reusable takeout container front, it's the space concern. And, I was trying to think through this in preparation for today a little bit around so many industries have successfully created programs so you have to return the product, right? You have to return the library book. You used to have to return your Netflix disc or your video to the video store to be able to get another video, right? With takeout, it's not the same thing. You could never bring that container back, and you could order from someone else because there are thousands of restaurants across our region. So kind of instilling in people that sense of self-responsibility of you need to be the one to bring this container back is a public education part of this that I think the restaurants are part of, but it has to be bigger than that because they alone can't make that happen. They can try to make the space for it in restaurants, especially new ones they might be building going forward, but it's challenging to implement, which doesn't mean it's not possible. It just has some challenges along the way, right?
Great. I appreciate your comments, and I definitely agree. It's actually encouraging to know that everyone's sentiment, everyone's heart's in the right place. It's always good to hear. But yes, you have a lot of questions that we all agree are very valid questions, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to start to come with feasible solutions to resolve some of those items.
The other part, Tiandra, if I can jump in for
Sure.
one more second, is
Yes,
listening
absolutely.
to Rachel talk and thinking about what people can do or willing to do and what they'll get on board with. I think our industry in general is one of the most regulated, inspected, taxed industries that there is. Every type of inspection you can have comes through a restaurant. Every kind of permit you might ever need, a restaurant has to have it, compared to some other businesses out there. So I think our industry in general is open to being part of the solution. The word regulation makes them nervous. So I saw some people in the chat saying, how can we avoid calling it regulation and think more about like, how can we collectively be protecting the earth or be part of this movement? And I think that's key in this, in terms of getting the restaurants on board to
Reframing.
try something new.
Okay, that makes sense to me too. So we're also fortunate to have Kiera Ware from the Department of Energy and Environment joining us today. We'd like to ask Kiera if she has any comments or reactions to what she heard, especially related to the grants program for reusables that's expected to be funded by DC Council. And I'll give her 3 minutes as well.
Hey, Tiandra, thanks so much for having me, and nice to hear from everyone. As Tiandra just said, my name is Kiera Ware. I work for DOEE, and I'm on the team that oversees bag law implementation, food serviceware, phone ban, straw ban, so all the good stuff that we already know a lot about. I can say regarding the grant program, one, thanks so much to Rachel for that much awesome update. It's definitely news to me. I can say that my team at DOEE, we're really excited to be able to take on the grant program and help move DC towards our zero waste goals. In the spirit of transparency, though, I am saying that this is a just new RFA program for us. And there's going to be a lot of research that needs to be done just to make sure that we can implement it and structure it in a way that actually makes sense for our regulated community. So with that said, I definitely want to just open up the line of communication and, be in conversation with, Dan and other organizations or John from Paradigm so that we can make sure that we get this money structured the way that it needs to be. So I'll put my email address in the chat. And again, just going to open up communication so that as we're continuing this process, you kind of have a direct line to us.
Thank you, Kiera, and thank you for being so generous with your email. And clearly, DOEE is definitely, I'm sure they are going to be very, very supportive with this grants, and we'll be hearing more from your groups over the next year. We also have 2 participants from DPW, Blake Adams and Charlotte Dreisen. Would one of you like to share any thoughts about what you've heard so far today? Perhaps maybe about how reusable takeout programs might help DPW support its zero waste goals?
Sure thing, Tiandra. First of all, I just want to thank Sierra Club DC for putting on this fantastic event. I think this is a super interesting topic, and we're always heartened to see both the interest in the community, residents, local businesses for reuse and zero waste initiatives, but always super exciting to see businesses approach it, and love to see the private sector do what they can and generate innovative ideas and models. So this fantastic conversation, really happy to be involved. On the whole, reuse is at the top of the echelon for us in terms of our strategies for achieving zero waste. So I should say reduction first and then reuse. So we love to see different solutions being employed that can kind of cut out the waste generated from the source, and just very supportive of these types of initiatives. Takeout containers, particularly as folks have stayed home through the pandemic, I think have been ticking up in the at-home waste stream. We've seen at-home waste generation increase for about 8 to 10% relative to a non-COVID year. And so, obviously, as people stayed home and tried to support their local family-owned restaurants and businesses, they've had to take out more. And to that end, there's been a lot more of that type of waste being generated at home. So this is a timely topic, and we're happy to answer any questions that folks have that we can.
Thank you, Blake. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. We appreciate you for joining the call today. While Leah gathers some questions for us, we would like to just remind you that today's event has been organized by the DC chapter of the Sierra Club, more specifically the Zero Waste Committee, which focuses on ways to reduce waste in DC. If you're interested in joining the DC chapter of the Sierra Club, please contact us. Details are in the chat, and we'll hope that you'll be inspired to join us. So Leah, can you let us know if you have any questions?
Yes, we have gotten some great comments and questions in the chat. We encourage more to come in. Not surprisingly, quite a number for John to explain a little bit more about this idea of a reuse system. So John, maybe you could explain a little bit. We had a question from Allison asking about the lag time of return and wanting to understand kind of how that works with the locations, and particularly how to advertise this system, how you're doing that to get customers, both customers, individuals, as well as the restaurants. And kind of relatedly, there was a comment from Julie about the challenge of getting people to actually return the containers, kind of an analogy with video return. And I was wondering if you could comment on the incentive scheme. Why would people return the containers? So let's start off with that. Thanks.
Okay, on why people would return the containers. And first of all, thank you for those questions. And all of them are very, we can really go into the weeds with them, but I'll try and be as simple as possible with them. So why would people return the containers? For the most part, when looking at the whole sort of reason why somebody participates in it, it's because they already are or have been introduced to reuse in some way or another, right? So there is an assumed at this early stage, right? Because you have early adopters, laggards, and all that kind of different sort of adoption curve, people in the different adoption curve. The people who are the early adopters are motivated. It's part of their value system, right? And so there is an inherent desire to participate in a reuse program, return the containers, et cetera. There are other ways to incentivize. We're looking at, we're developing a rewards program that provides points and things like that for returns and frequent use and things like that. Because remember that every time somebody uses or orders from a restaurant, the more frequently they do, the less single-use disposables they're using, right? And so we have the rewards program as well. Those are the two main ones, I think, from the customer side. And also making it's really, really important to understand consumer behavior, their logistics, where they travel, the city centers, where do they work, where do they live, and placing kiosks and or return bins at restaurants that are accessible at all times, very convenient. Maybe they're near a metro or at the restaurants that they're going to frequent or pick up their dinners, things like that. The restaurants have other incentives as well. That's a big sort of package to a big thing to unpack. So I don't think that was actually in your question. I can save that for another one. In terms of lag time for returns, we're actually seeing people who the early adopters, because we had our micropilot and now we've been operating here in the DC area since April. We actually see a return time of between honestly 2 days to about 3 or 4 days. I don't have the data in front of me, so I can't be succinct on that, but the return time is actually pretty quick. So I wouldn't actually even call it a lag time. It's more of a return time. And then advertising, we recognize the value of social media and also other types of traditional marketing and outreach. And so we just hired a full-time or part-time a social media and marketing person to help us really, really build up the membership and also to promote the restaurants, because it goes hand in hand. This is what we call a two-sided market, where you have to build up the consumer memberships and the restaurants at the same time, because both want the other.
Thanks so much, John. And one additional related question was asking by Amanda from DC Council is what's the ratio of used to returned? And I'll just add that we had a previous webinar where we brought in some of the reuse systems that are occurring around the country now, including in San Francisco, Colorado, all over, and including Green to Go in Durham, North Carolina, where they mentioned they have a 97% return rate because they have such strong incentives to reminders, education, as well as other efforts. So let's go to the next question, which is kind of sort of for Rachel, but it might actually be answerable by some of the restaurants, which comes from Kathy, who is the chair of Sierra Club DC chapter. So it's great to have you, Kathy. What regulations need to change? And Rachel, do you want to start that off, please? And then
I actually think restaurants would be better positioned to answer that than I would, because I'm actually not familiar with all of the regulations that they're subject to.
Okay, that sounds great. Any of the restaurants, Dan or Julie?
This is Dan. Off the cuff, I don't think there is a regulation that is in our way or that is preventing us from doing this. I saw someone ask in the chat, is it legal to bring your own reusable container to a restaurant? Sure. There's no regulation that prevents us. There's just the operational reality. So for example, one of my restaurants is making 300 meals per hour. Those kitchens are moving at 100 miles an hour. It's complex to say, and everything is trained and spec'd and organized and stored. And so while it seems so incredibly simple, if a guest says, hey, you're making that cake for us, can I bring you this glass cake stand to put it on? And I'm thinking, oh, Lord, please don't, right? We will lose it, break it, So that's a long answer to, I don't think there are regulations in our way. I think it's just operational realities that we have to learn to solve.
Right, great. Any other comments, Julie from Restaurant Association? Any concerns?
Same answer. I don't think there's any regulations in the way, and I honestly don't know off the top of my head any health department aspects of having someone's outside container being in your kitchen with other people's space and food, and I'm not sure of the logistics of that part, but we could certainly find out through our networks here. Jumping back to what John was mentioning, John Hanson, around the returning containers, I think in my mind, when I was speaking about that, I was sort of putting myself in Dan's shoes to think about, if you're a restaurant and you wanted to not have to have both sets of takeout containers, right? You don't want to have space for the reusable ones and for regular ones because you're not sure which customer's coming through the door. If you as the restaurant choose to just take on this plan that you're going to be a reusable container only restaurant, it's a huge risk you're taking that every customer who wants to order from you is going to be willing to take part in that, right? Even with the incentives you build in, trying to be good citizens, taking part in the marketing, overcoming that hurdle is going to be requires a village, so to speak, I think.
Right.
This is
John,
John.
you want to respond on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really loved that Julie and you and Dan brought this question of the stocking space. So I worked in restaurants in my early life. So I started as a dishwasher at the age of 10. This was at a time when that was okay, especially if you had family in the restaurant. But so I've worked in restaurants a long time, and I understand a lot of the concerns, and I really do deep dives with our restaurant partners to understand what their challenges are. And so with regard to our program, and I believe other programs as well, we're very sensitive to the space issue. And we're also very sensitive to the fact that you can't just swing from a regular, a standard traditional restaurant into a reusables only restaurant. There's an evolution that can happen, and you probably will never achieve, pure reusable. But the idea is that we would stock just in time on a fairly consistent basis so that you didn't have to allocate a lot of space for for containers. Because I know Dan, and I hear you on that, where you're like, I have to stock all my regular single use, and then I have to have a whole other area for all my disposables. What we're currently doing, and I think other systems do this, is restock every 2 or 3 days. And then remember, it's based on, well, we do based on membership, but you do have partnership tracking or member tracking depending on the different type of system that you have as well. So long story short, most systems are very sensitive to that issue and try to stock you just in time based on the amount of members that are participating at your restaurant. And we track the inventory so that we have a good sense of when you're running low.
Thank you so much, John. I'm now going to turn to a question Max from Busboys and Poets had a little earlier, which he asked Rachel, what responsibility does the state have in mandating a transition to a less wasteful economy? Obviously, many restaurants are hanging on by a thread now, and accusations of overreach will fly no matter what the council does. But is that temporary pain ultimately worth it? And how do you go about accounting for long-term benefit in the face of clear short-term economic distress caused by COVID?
I think that's a really good question, and it's one we had to think about a lot because we were passing this bill in the middle of the pandemic, when it was very clear that this industry was the one that was getting hit among the hardest. And so the direction that we ultimately went in on this issue is support and incentives for restaurants to do something that maybe they want to do, but they don't feel like they can, to try to push everyone in this direction rather than including a mandate, which there were some mandates included in the original bills introduced. So I think we're starting with this incentive structure, and then we'll see how that goes. And then certainly something that the council and the government will have to keep an eye on as it moves forward.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and another question to Rachel comes from Beth from Week Cycle Leaders. What mechanisms, if any, are there for holding DOE accountable to measurable results? How will results be measured? And is there a specific program or person who will be held accountable by council, for example, during performance hearings? How do you think the level of funding compares to the level of effort necessary to achieve the goals? And she mentioned $65,000, sounds like a significant amount, but I think you said it's $200,000 per year that's being allocated. So if you could clarify that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So I love this question, Beth. First, I'll clarify that it's $200,000 for the grants and rebates themselves, $65,000 for administration and outreach. And then actually she notes that doesn't seem like enough for an FTE. There is an FTE included as well, but that FTE is both for this and for a couple new requirements regarding food serviceware generally. So that'll be a new person for that team, just not only for this. But I really like the question about accountability, because that's, passing the law is really just the beginning. You have to make sure that it gets implemented well with the right people in the room, and that there's an ongoing support for it and stewardship. So we will, from our perspective, we will definitely be asking DOEE about this every year during oversight, what they've done to stand up the program next year, and then on an annual basis. And then we'll be looking for advocates who are really interested to be paying attention as well, to come testify. And we're really excited for DOE to take this on, because they are really a mission-driven agency. And I think that they want this program to succeed just as much as we do. So hopefully that's at least starts to answer the question. But if there was something I didn't get at, I'm happy to answer follow-up.
Great, thank you so much. John, back to you. We just have a couple more minutes, and there's a question from Takako, who is with Harmonious Restaurant. And he mentions that he's a small operation, but many of our customers are environmentally conscious. Is it feasible for us to participate anywhere in the program? And also, are there any grant opportunities for us, which I hope Rachel can respond to, maybe elaborating a little bit more on the grants and how they would actually work for a restaurant. Thanks.
Thank you. And hi, Takako. I remember we contacted, I think, or we had been in touch somehow. I don't know who contacted who early on when we did the micro pilot. So it's good to see you here. And so, yes, absolutely. So right now, the way we are building the program is what I call neighborhood by neighborhood, essentially, because there are logistical issues around that. There are opportunities to support restaurants in further areas, in the DC area, but it also requires additional resources and things like that. So we're taking a neighborhood by neighborhood approach. And Takako, forgive me, but I can't remember exactly where Harmonious Kitchen is located. Can you? I don't know if you have the ability to unmute or not. Petworth. Okay, so we're not in Petworth yet. But here's what we're doing is we're taking interest from everybody, and then we're coordinating that so we can see where the interest is coming from, what areas, so that we can look at what area, build a strategy essentially to expand into the other areas. That's ultimately what we're doing. So if there are restaurants that are interested in participating, employers who want to provide memberships for their employees in areas, etc., whoever it might be, just contact us on our webpage or at hello@paradigmtogo.com.
Thank you so much, John. Rachel, can you just quickly comment on the grants, and then I think we're going to have to move on.
What was the specific question about them?
How could restaurants follow up on the grant opportunities? Is it a little too early since the budget hasn't
Yeah,
passed? How should
so
they-
it's a little early because it'll only be after there's the vote, it'll go into effect October 1st, and then DOEE will be standing up the grant program. And as the DOE representative said, they're going to have to do some research and kind of design the program. And at that point, they'll be putting it out for the public. And then that's certainly the intent, is that a restaurant would be eligible for a grant for this purpose.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to thank you all for excellent comments and questions. You can continue to dialogue in the chat. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Tiandra.
Thank you, Leah. Yes, we're getting close to time. So thank you all for joining the Turning Takeout Green webinar. As we started this webinar, we asked, how can we make reusable takeout container services a reality in DC? And whether you think there's a need for additional dialogue to accelerate reuse and other circular economy strategies that could help DC meet its zero waste goals, including its 2032 waste diversion goals. I'd like to return to our speakers to ask if you have any thoughts or final thoughts on this issue. And we'll start with John.
Sure, thank you very much. Yes, and I do, as we're doing the final thoughts, I did want to mention also that Gina Matias from Tacoma Park Sustainability Department is in attendance as well, and they've been great supporters. They have a business grant for sustainability for Tacoma Park members, and that's another program that's going on. But the comment that I would really like to make is really focused on what the next steps are. This is an amazing a convening of people across all the different sectors that are required to make something like this happen. And so I would like to just put in, my comments that I think it would be great if we could figure out a way to continue these conversations about how to support these reuse programs through sort of a cross-sector dialogue. And I'd be willing to be sort of a central organizing person for that if it's needed, and we can figure out how best to really work with all the different organizing entities and all the different actors and stakeholders across the DC metro area to make that happen. I think it would be a great benefit to support the zero waste omnibus bill and help turn DC metro area into a clean, resilient, circular city.
Thank you, John. Does Rachel or Dan, do you have any thoughts?
I have a follow-up comment on something that came up earlier that I thought might be helpful to clarify, as there's been discussion about whether restaurants can use reusable takeout. And I did want to note, and in the current regulations, there might be some things that touch on that. And I did want to note that the bill says expressly that restaurants are allowed to use this type of service. And the intent of that provision in the bill is to make it that all regulations are conforming to that bill, to that law. So if there are regulations that would conflict with that now, those will have to be changed. So I just wanted to clarify that since it came up.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. That's very helpful, actually. Do you have any final thoughts?
And then other than that, I'm really happy you're all here and interested, and it probably will make to have more meetings like this as the program gets stood up at DOEE. And I think Sierra Club could be a great partner to the agency to do outreach to entities that would be interested.
Great. No. Dan, do you have any thoughts about additional dialogue?
So additional dialogue will be the key. It does take getting all of the stakeholders at the table. And I would just say, what I remind myself and try to remind other restaurant owners and business owners, it's really easy to say why something won't work. It's really easy to say why we can't. It's really easy to identify the challenges, the problems. And I try to reframe that with a reminder that, well, we also can't keep doing what we're doing. And so we're not really choosing between something that sounds hard or sounds impossible and something that is viable. We're currently doing something that is impossible to sustain if you use the definitions of the word impossible and the definitions of the word sustain. And so we're already doing something impossible that must change. And so, yeah, there are challenges. They need to be identified. We need to bring all the stakeholders to the table. Good regulation or protection needs to be written from the inside out with operators at the table. And operators have to be willing to come to the table and collaborate. So I'm an optimist when we get all of the stakeholders here. This is not an unsolvable challenge. It's just a little complex and has a bunch of moving parts. We're gonna have to make some changes and have some sacrifice. But what we're doing right now is awful.
So thank you, Dan, for your final thoughts. Thanks, John and Rachel. So John's already raised his hand to keep the conversation going. So if anyone's interested in joining John or just being a part of this continual dialogue, definitely note your interest in the chat. And we will be saving that information to pass along to John. I would like to thank the Zero Waste Committee for organizing this event and Our Last Straw for partnering with the Sierra Club on this event. We were delighted that you were able to bring Dan Simons as a speaker. I'd like to thank each of the speakers, Dan, Rachel, and John, and our stakeholders, Kiara Ware, Blake Adams, Charlotte Dreisen, Julie Sprouser, and Gina Matthias also joined us from Tacoma Park Sustainability today. Thanks to all the participants for your great questions. Before we sign off, we do hope that you'll be inspired to join the Sierra Club DC chapter and help us promote zero waste. So I know it's 2:58, we just have a few minutes left. If anyone wants to stick around longer, you are more than welcome to do so. We will unmute you and you can continue to have dialogue in the chat. I saw a lot of good conversation going on. Leo will be able to stick around with you guys. I'll have to sign off right at 3, but thanks again for joining. Have a great week and have a great plastic-free July, everybody. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Great to have folks join and welcome for folks to stay if anybody has. I know John was able to stay a little bit longer, and so if anybody wants to directly ask him some questions, you're welcome to.
I do. So I hope you
Great.
can hear me okay. I'm in a noisy place, but John, I have a question for you. I
Maybe,
am not a
Kelly,
restaurant.
you could just say where you're from.
Okay,
I
my
think-
name is Kelly Smith. My business is in Tyson's Corner. We are a urban farm. So I'm not a restaurant, but we do have individual customers. For something like what we have, we're basically salad and greens. What are the different types of containers that you offer? Are they segmented? I was trying to go through your website real quick to try to find out, but since you're here, I might as well just ask you.
No, absolutely. It's terrific. And thank you for the work that you're doing. So there are different containers that we use, and we have access to other types of containers. We're currently limited to the containers that are designed for reusability that are currently in the market. There are only 2 companies that make them currently. We're looking to, actually there are more than 2 companies, but of the type that we use, only 2 companies. We're looking to create our own. Ultimately, we have 3 section, we have single section, large squares, we can get round ones, 32-ounce ones. So there's a variety of different containers. And if you have a program idea, or if you want to figure out a solution, it's really about volume. What do you need per order, volume, and finding something that matches as closely as possible to what you currently have. So I'm happy to chat if you want to email me, we can schedule a time.
I will do that. And I have one other question. And what about labels? Are we able to use labeling on the containers, or is that something that you can't do because of your sterilization, your cleaning process?
So it would depend on, because I also think that there are a lot of different types of things that we can do. In our standard model, if you wanted to have sort of like an isolated initiative, an isolated program for just your company, we can do something where you could put labels on the containers and things like that to identify your, to brand them essentially for you. But if you wanted to just find a way to have it be integrated with ours, we could still potentially do that. We would just have to be very, very strict in how we allocate the containers. But that's something we could chat about.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Thank you so much. I think there was such a wealth of information that people got a lot of the ideas, and we'll follow up directly in the future. But I'm especially excited about the opportunities for the future. That was really kind also for Dan to mention that we could come and have a meeting and discussion at one of his restaurants hosted by founding farmers. So I'm already looking forward to that. And actually getting to meet you in person, John. And it's been a long time.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Debbie and Susan and Angela.